Table Talk. Uh, Voice of the Adoptee is the topic of this Table Talk today. And I am joined by my good friend, Mandy Mensah, and new friend, Lydia Beckley. So welcome. How are y'all today?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing well. These Table Talks are for primarily for our church, Sanctuary Columbus Church, but they're certainly open to anybody who's not a part of Sanctuary and is interested in this particular subject. This month, November, is Adoption and Foster Care Month, and so we recognize adoption and foster care, and we have several families at Sanctuary Columbus Church who are fostering and or adopting. I have counted before, but I've kind of lost count because over the last 10 years, we've had at least one family in that process of adopting and or fostering. In fact, many people find Sanctuary Columbus Church because of the number of families who are connected to Sanctuary. Now, primarily, the number one family dynamic of those in adoption and foster care at our church is a cross-racial or transracial adoption or foster care. That is a white family adopting a child of color or fostering a child of color. Most of them are white families adopting or fostering Black children, but we do have Chinese and Indian children who have been adopted and fostered here at Sanctuary Columbus Church. So today, this is very important because never before have we taken the perspective and the attention of listening to the voice of the adoptee. Most of our conversation has centered on the family, and that's why I am so excited for this conversation. So without any further ado, I'm going to let these ladies introduce themselves. Mandy, you get to go first. Tell us who you are. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so Mandy Mensah, I've been going to Sanctuary since about the beginning. I am a domestic infant transracial adoptee. So my parents are white and I am obviously identify as Black. So that is a little bit about my story. I also have an older brother who is adopted as well, was a domestic infant adoptee too, and who is also Black.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Lydia.
Yes, so my name is Lydia Berkey. I am also a transracial adoptee. I was adopted as an infant privately. I have an older brother who is white like my parents. He was adopted. And then I have two younger siblings that are Black that are also adopted.
Wow. We're going to hear a lot more of your stories in our conversation today. My first question is, I used one term, you used another. I said cross-racial, and you said transracial. Is there a difference, and which one do you prefer?
I think it's just up to the individual's discretion. I say transracial. I tend to hear that and see that used a lot more in the adoption community.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I feel like before I got connected with the community, I used almost anything and everything, but I feel like that's what's been widely used. And so that's language I've started incorporating as well.
Thank you so much. I'm on a learning curve here, so I'm here to learn. I hope everyone else who is listening and watching today, you are here to learn as well. And then also understand that though Mandy and Lydia are adoptees, they don't represent an entire adoptee community. So everything you hear from them today is not going to be like, oh, well, I heard this one adoptee say, and so therefore it must be golden. This is their story, their perspective. Let's learn, let's listen, and hear what we can grow, where we can grow in our relationship on the subject. So Mandy, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit more about your adoption story.
Yeah, so I was adopted and I went straight home from the hospital with my family. adopted in the late 80s, not that long ago. But it was a closed adoption, meaning there was no ongoing communication, there was no letters, phone calls, visits, or anything like that. I am currently not in reunion with my first family. I use first family. A lot of people also use birth family. And so anytime I reference my family, I'm talking about the family I was adopted into, the family I've been with these last 30 some years. So that's a little bit about my story of adoption, a little bit about the beginning.
Yeah, thank you. Lydia, a little bit more of your story.
Yeah, so same thing. I was born in Detroit, Michigan. I was raised in a small white town about an hour north from there. Again, no contact with birth family. I refer to them as birth family. And I'm also not in reunion. There hasn't been any sort of contact. I did receive a little bit of information from the agency I was adopted through when I turned 18. I'd requested things. There wasn't a lot there to give me, not any real identifying information, and not a lot on my case. I was adopted at 4 months old. Well, I went home to live with my family at 4 months old, adopted within the first year of my life. And yeah, there just wasn't much to tell me more about the experience of what led to me being placed.
Yeah. So how have you now sort of looked back on that experience, particularly, not being in reunion right now with your birth family or your first family? Lydia?
It's difficult. I mean, I feel like it's a daily grief and loss that I'm dealing with, as I continue through daily life, as I accomplish more things, as I hit more milestones. I continually grieve the loss of my birth family and them not being able to be here, on high school graduation day, college graduation day. I'm still thinking about them. Christmas, Thanksgiving, even when I was a kid, up until I was probably 16, I cried myself to sleep Thanksgiving, Christmas, and on my birthday. I just wanted to, I just yearned for that contact. I yearned for knowing what they were doing, knowing if they missed me, if they thought about me, and anything like that. So I'm continuing to heal from that and learning how to honor myself and honor my birth family when there isn't that connection.
Yeah. Wow. Mandy, how are you reflecting now at this stage of your life on your adoption experience?
Yeah, I think growing up, I was not surrounded by a lot of other adoptees. And so I never knew how to kind of make sense of my story. I never saw it reflected or mirrored really in anyone. There was one other family in my high school who had transracially adopted. And so we found some commonality there and were close at that point. But I wasn't quite sure how to make sense of it, how to process it. I think for me, it was when I became a mom, I really started to want more answers and want to feel more connected to this first family of origin. Where do these pieces come from? What's part of my story? What does this look like? What do I have to pass on biologically to my children? When I had my girls, that was the first time I saw a biological relative, is when I had my daughters. I've never seen a biological relative until then. And so I think that did a lot for me of really taking time to process through my adoption. A term that you hear in the adoption community is coming out of the fog, where you start to realize, okay, I might have had a great family and a great upbringing, but there is still, like Lydia said, loss and grief that comes along with that. And how do you process that? And how do you make sense of that? And so that evolution really started as my motherhood journey started for me.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the fog, the feeling of loss, grief, maybe even trauma. You don't hear that a lot from this whole conversation about adoption, that it's all just wonderful and you've been rescued and saved. Um, how has this been a process where you've grown to even embrace and give yourself the permission to grieve?
Mm.
For me, that was moving away. So I kind of had this first experience when I went away to college because, again, I grew up in this like small Christian town, in a church where, you know, saviorism was big. You know, my parents were kind of put on this pedestal for adopting these children and doing this great thing. And so it really took me removing myself from that space. I went to therapy, and it was the first time I heard adoption was trauma. And it was hard for me to navigate and accept because I was adopted as an infant. So, how can something that happened within the first year of my life that I don't even remember still be affecting me today? Like, that just was so hard for me to figure out. And so, it really took that for me to understand it and just healing, um, immersing myself in communities with people that looked like me, for me to start this journey of healing and acceptance. And also just learning the vocabulary, right? Like hearing trauma, hearing coming out of the fog, learning those words so that I could articulate my own feelings and experiences that I had the first 18 years of my life.
Right. Right. Wow. Mandy, I'm sure some of that resonates with you. You know, what part of that connects with you and you and processing that trauma and embracing, you know, the hardship. I mean, even being an adoptee.
Yeah, I think for me, I've gotten connected online with an adoptee community just in this last year. I don't know why I never thought to look online before. You know, there's not anybody in my everyday life. And I'm like, I'm the only one. In fact, I'm not. So I think connecting with this adult adoptee community and hearing people say things that I've always struggled with or wrestled with or felt, but never felt validated enough to be able to say that or express that as part of my story, is part of my process. So when I met Lydia, we were on a Black transracial adoptee call, and just to hear the language and some of the pain that people have gone through and lived through and how they experience it, you know, I resonated with it. I was like, that's how I've been feeling. I didn't either have the words for it or the community to validate it. And so that was a very helpful and freeing space for me to connect to and be a part of since then.
Yeah, wow. I mean, like I'm even thinking immediately right now that there are resources, there are connection groups for the families who are adopting children into their home and into their families. But what about the connections for adoptees? What about their groups? In fact, that's how you two found each other. Lydia, tell everybody how you and Mandy got connected.
Yes, so I was a part of this group called Black Adoption Collective that we started last National Adoption Awareness Month, between adoptive parents and adoptees to elevate and amplify Black adoption narratives. And Mandy was a part of that first, you know, kind of group that we had. And so I got to connect with her there. And then I've always just had this passion and this calling to want to create community for transracial adoptees. And so last February, I held a Galentine's Day event with another adoptee, and Mandy came, and hearing more about her story and just getting to know her a little bit through those two interactions, I knew I wanted to be her friend. And, you know, again, it just to feel seen is in that way, right? Like I have Black friends, but they can't relate to my adoptee experience. And then there's adoptees that may not be transracially adopted or aren't people of color. And so they can't relate to that. So to have someone and meet someone like Mandy who can relate to those intersections of my life was life-changing. And continues to be life-changing.
And you two haven't actually met in person yet.
Not yet.
We're working on it.
Yes.
So all of this connection was over Zoom or video or whatever the case may be, how awesome it is to have those resources there to connect adoptees together. Now, Lydia, you said something that really struck a chord with me, is that meeting Mandy and other Black African-American adoptees who were raised or in families that were white, so not culturally or racially like them, enabled you to have a connection with another African-American who knew your story particularly. So, Mandy, I'm wondering, what was it like growing up Black in a white family?
You know,
Ooh-wee.
ooh-wee is right. I think when you don't know any different, you're not sure what to do. And so I think for me personally, like my brother also adopted being Black. We lived in a diverse neighborhood. I was seeing diversity all around me, and I kind of assumed everyone had that understanding or appreciation. But as I look back on my upbringing, it was always, all my faith spaces have been predominantly white, and white theologians and all of that have been elevated. I never saw people of color elevated or books read or things that I can remember. And so I think for me, a lot of that racial identity or feeling like I am a Black woman has really, really struggled. Lydia referenced a party she hosted, and she asked us all to answer I am worthy statements. And it just hit me that, like, I am worthy to be a Black woman, whether I was adopted by a white family, grew up in a white community, whatever. This is how God made me. He made me Black on purpose, and that enough gives me my identity and who I am. But I don't know if I would have gotten, there without the community of it, because I just wasn't sure growing up. I just didn't know how to quite make sense of everything. So I think owning that part of my story has allowed me to reflect on my adoption a little more authentically and honestly, to see some of the grief and loss that I have of not being connected to the Black community, Black church, Black faith, all of that. I was watching Sister, like, could I have a twin sister out there? Like, this might be my story. I don't know. I remember my first Black teacher and just being in awe and just, not having a lot of racial mirrors in leadership positions or faith positions. And so I think that's definitely a growth opportunity as I reflect over my upbringing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Lydia, for you as well. I mean, you said you had two other Black siblings, as well as a white sibling in your family. What was it like growing up as a Black woman in this multiracial family, but white parents?
Right. So my Black siblings are 6 and 7 years younger than me. And so while I had siblings that were also Black, they were in a different stage than I was in coming out of the fog and also just discovering their racial identity. So a lot of times I was honestly putting the pressure on myself to teach them, right? Teach my Black brother about being a Black man in white society, right? My parents can't protect him from all that the world is, and teaching my sister the same thing. So in some ways it was very comforting, and I know there's other adoptees that don't have that experience, but it still was isolating. With time, my siblings are older now, we're closer, we have our own group chat, like going to family events, like we are just able to be that support for each other, that we can talk about those hard conversations. And when they tell me about something, I'm quick to call my parents and be like, what happened here? What happened at school? Right? Like I am continuing, always being an advocate for my siblings, as they still are young adults, and just kind of navigating that.
Yeah, they still need the community.
Yeah.
So even though they're older, they still need the community. There's still a lot to process. And like we said earlier, everyone's got their own story, their own journey, their way in which they are navigating being an adoptee in a cross-racial or transracial family. So we can't look at everybody the same. But one thing that everyone needs is community. You need a community. You need some place where you can process with folks who actually understand exactly your family upbringing, and dynamic. All right, so just give me just this isn't a question I prepared you with. Okay, all
Okay.
right, okay. So what's something that, looking back on, folks would say that was really white, but you were like, I'm cool with that. I mean, like, that was my family. You know what I'm saying? We had green bean casserole, or you know what I'm saying. A National Lampoon's Vacation was our family movie. Is there anything unique, about your family that folks be like, yo, that was really white, but you're like, please, that's my family. Don't talk about my family.
I'm gonna stick with the food, and I'll just say bland food. Like, white people really don't cook like with seasoning, but I love like my mom or dad. Like, they have certain dishes that I love, or my grandma. Like, I don't know. It's just like, if I would bring like a Black friend there, they'd be like, there ain't even a speck of seasoning. But I will ride hard for my grandma's mashed potatoes. Like, don't play.
That's right.
But
That's
like,
right.
it's bland. I ain't even gonna lie. I bring my
Uh,
own seasoning home now. Like, it's bland.
yeah, Black folks we got to see the seasoning on there.
Wow.
We got to taste it before we actually taste it. Like, I can just see the pepper. I can see the paprika. Oh, I could see the garlic flecks. Like, you're not supposed to see no garlic flecks, but cloves, I mean, stuff, seasoning that it comes in a small little jar because you don't use it that much. That's the kind of seasoning my mama used. She used that kind of seasoning right there. You know what I'm saying? That's what's up. But that's good. Thank you for sharing that story. I know I didn't prepare you for that question, but we are a makeup of our families, and even in this transracial adoptive family, you are still a makeup of those who have nurtured you and the environment that you grew up in. So, Sanctuary Columbus is a intentionally multiracial church, and what that means for us is that we intentionally have conversations about racial justice. And one of my wonderings is, when did you encounter racism as a young person growing up in this transracial family? Was it from a family member? And then how did your parents help or not help you through that experience? So, if you would be so kind to share that with us, Mandy.
Putting me on the spot. Yeah. I remember two distinct interactions growing up. And obviously, I'm sure my childhood was riddled with them. But the ones that stick out to me is one time I went to a small Christian school. And so small schools, I feel like, are always doing fundraisers for something. And so we were doing a fundraiser, trying to sell something. And I remember a woman came up to my mom. We were sitting at a table together. And she was like, is she a fresh air kid? I wasn't sure what that term meant, but I guess there was some kind of program that would take kids from the city of New York or Philadelphia and take them out to more suburban areas to give them a new experience, expose them to different cultures. And I remember my mom being like, why is that your first assumption of our relationship? Why is that where your mind goes, that I'm this person who's rescuing her or giving her this opportunity? Why can't she be my daughter? And I was just really confused about that whole interaction and just like, well, doesn't she know I'm your daughter? Like that doesn't even make sense. Why would she ask that, not realizing a lot of people didn't know how to make sense of that. And then I remember one time somebody else saying, wow, your dad must be really Black. When he was like, who is that? And I was like, oh, that's my mom. And he was like, oh, your dad must be really Black if you're that shade and complexion. And I was like, I had no idea what to do with it. And I was just blown away and just kind of deer in the headlights that happened. And so I didn't always feel the most prepared to handle those, but those are two situations from, early elementary that I remember.
Man, sorry. Oh my goodness. Lydia?
Yeah, I feel like there was a lot of experiences like that for me. I mean, in third grade, not getting invited to a birthday party because Black girls weren't pretty. I was very young the first time I got called the N-word. I don't even remember. I was probably like 6 or 7. And I don't even know, like, reflecting on that, I don't even know how I knew that was a bad word, but I just knew it carried a lot of weight. And things like that just continue to get worse, more vulgar the older I got, and even sometimes compromising my physical safety. And again, reflecting, I never told my parents about any negative racial experiences I had. And I'm trying to figure out why I felt like my parents weren't a safe space for me to talk about those things with. I'm not sure if it was something they said, or maybe it was just the fact that they didn't say anything. You know, we didn't talk about race. I knew I was Black, but we never discussed what being Black in America looked like, or, you know, me being a Black woman. And so those just weren't conversations we had. And so I guess I just had an intuition that I didn't want to talk to my parents about that. And I don't know how they would have handled that because we never talked about it. I know my younger siblings have had negative racial experiences, and they have talked to my parents about it. And obviously, my parents handle it and validate my siblings' feelings. But I think there are a lot of times where white adoptive parents will prioritize white comfort over their transracial adoptees' feelings because whether it's a family member, a lot of things happened in church. Let me say, there was a lot of mean things said, I would say, by family and church members. And those things just weren't confronted, right? It's like, oh, we know they have good intentions. Even like 2 years ago, this woman came up and touched my hair, and I was ready to rock and roll. Like, and my mom's like, she just wants to say your hair is beautiful. I'm like, Mom, that's not the point. I'm an adult. She's coming in my space. This is inappropriate. And she's been doing it since I was young. Like, you can't just say she likes my hair. That's not fair. That's not okay. And so in situations like that, again, it's prioritizing the white comfort when that should be addressed. That should be canceled right away. And I still sometimes when I go back into my parents' white spaces, I go back to the young girl. I forget my voice. I don't know how to use it. And I look to them to help me advocate for myself. And so that can be challenging.
Yeah, that's the word right there. That's actually some really good words for white parents who are adopting transracially, that you can be an advocate. As a matter of fact, you ought to be, perhaps. Maybe not perhaps. Let me stop softening it. You need to be an advocate for your child. You be an advocate for your child if they came through your own, loins, if you will. So be an advocate for this child that you have adopted into your family. That means there's going to be some learning that white families need to go through. Parents, white siblings, that they need to go through in order to help this child become a full member of the family and be protected as a full member of the family. So good word. Well, you mentioned something, Lydia, that I actually want to get to, and that is the well-intentioned Christian perspectives on adoption. I mean, so well-intended. Romans 8, that we are adopted into God's family, and thereby we can now call him Abba, Father. Look, we're all adopted. We were all orphaned. We were all fatherless, and now we have a father. Now we are no longer orphaned. And this becomes the Christian perspective on adoption. And as you said earlier as well, Christian parents, particularly white Christian parents who adopt cross-racially or transracially, they are held up in high regards, high esteem. Look at them. They are the model of what it takes to make sacrifices and to do all that it takes for the kingdom of God to accept these children into their home. What are some things, what are some phrases that you wish were no longer said by Christians, anybody for that matter, but especially Christians, with regards to cross-racial, transracial adoption? I keep saying cross, forgive me, but use your word, transracial adoption. What are some things you wish Christians would stop saying, please?
Where to start?
Where's well, how about Amanda, you said, adopted children should be grateful. Like
Mhm.
you should have this attitude of gratitude. Um, is that something you would say, hey, please stop that? And why would you say that should be something we just remove from our vocabulary and phrasing?
Absolutely. That one is probably my number one. When I hear it, just something rises up in me. I'm just like, you're asking someone's trauma and loss to be the source of their gratitude. Do I look into your life and ask the most painful thing you've been to say, why isn't your first response gratefulness and gratitude? I
Mm,
think it just is so dismissive and minimizing of what an adoptee has gone through and the loss that they've experienced, whether, in utero or, however long it's been. I just feel there's so much saviorism tied to that as well, this attitude of gratitude. And it's harmful and it's hurtful. And I can imagine every adoptee I've talked to has remembered every person who said that to them and how that has made them feel. And so that is the number one that I'm like, please, you must stop putting that into your vocabulary.
mm, hmm. Yeah, yeah. Here's another one, and as you're thinking of some others, feel free. Um, their family wasn't complete until they adopted. Family wasn't complete until they adopted. Who wants to take that one? Lydia?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think these all like just invoke like an emotion out of us, but to say that I take that as your family wasn't complete until another family was separated. It took family
Mm,
separation for
mm,
your family to be complete. Why is that something that we're celebrating?
mm.
That is what adoption is, right? And
Yeah.
especially, that's what foster care is for. Foster care, the primary goal is reunification. That's what we should be celebrating, not families being separated to
Mm.
create another family.
Wow. Mm. Well, I've got a list here, but are there any others that come to your mind? I can go through my list, but is there any others that come to your mind?
I think you hit on it when people talk about, God adopted us and you've been adopted. Like, this is God's story being played out in real life. Um, that one really bothers me as well. Because, if you're looking at God adopted us into eternal life from this life of sin and, all of these negative things, when you say that about someone's first family, you're already villainizing them more than the culture, the community already does. And you're
Mm,
elevating
mm,
that adoptive parent to be like God. Like, I have so many
mm,
issues with that parallel. My adoptive parents are not like God. My first family is not like all the evil and wrong of this world. I think that comparison is poor and just misses the mark on so many spaces. So that's one for me that I find deeply, deeply hurtful.
Woo.
Yeah. Another hurtful one for me is when people say, I was chosen. Like, you should be grateful. Your parents chose you. One, they didn't. I was placed with them because they were looking for a child, essentially. Um, and I was an available child through an adoption agency. Two, to be chosen, I first had to be unchosen by
Mm,
my birth
mm,
mother. And again, so invalidating to my trauma, to my feelings, to my emotions about being adopted. I would never choose this. And no one should have to, again, feel grateful for being chosen when most of us would love to be with our birth family.
yeah. Mm. Whew, I need a breath on that one. That is so heavy. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Are there any other things that folks have said that you just wish was no longer said? Like, please, be more thoughtful with your language. God blessed you, with a
Yeah.
new family. God gave this child a second chance. It's like, oh,
Adoption
Christian,
is love.
Mm.
adoption is love. Mm,
Adoption, or like love sees no color, those
mm,
types of things.
hmm.
Speak on that.
Yeah,
Because everyone loves to say that, right? Love has no color, whatever, whatever. But the world does see color. And when I step out of my parents' home, I'm Black. I'm not the Black
hmm,
child adopted by a white parent. My parents' white privilege can't cover me. I'm,
Mm.
mm,
and so you need to
hmm.
prepare your child for a world where they're going to be perceived for what they are. And a lot of times adoptive parents are scared of that, right? Like, oh, I don't want to scare my kid or have them live in fear.
Hmm.
Now, I don't think I live in fear of every day of how I'm going to be treated out in the world, but I am cognizant of how I walk and navigate through the world, right? It's not a fear, it's education. It's part of life. And white adoptive parents need to be able to prepare their child for what the real world is.
Yeah. Yeah. I really wonder, when a white family is going through the process of adoption, what kind of preparation is an agency giving to this white family, in their adoption process when they're particularly going to adopt transracially? I've heard folks say that, when they go through the process, they put on the application or what have you, that they will accept any child, right? They have no preference on the age or the gender or the race, or maybe they have, preference on the age, but not on the gender or the race, so that they are more open to receiving, a child. And then I just wonder, like, okay, well, what kind of preparation are they going through to receive a child who's not like them? I
Well,
mean, do you
I guess
know?
I should have said I'm a permanency and adoption caseworker full time.
Mm,
So this is my
okay.
life personally
All
and
right.
professionally. And
Okay.
there's very little training. Maybe an hour training talking about transracial adoption, which is usually not facilitated by someone who's transracially adopted. I know at my agency, there's like a training is like ethnic hair care that people can take. They're not obligated to, but a lot of times that's it. And that's
Mm,
the biggest problem with families adopting transracially is they're having a child placed in their home of a different race and then they're doing the work, right? We're working backwards. There
Mm.
should be, even before they want a child, before they're even accepting of that,
mm-hmm,
they need to be
mm-hmm.
doing their anti-racism work. They need to be culturally competent. There's all these things that they have to do. And so often they're working backwards, right?
Mm,
They, their mission or their personal experience with having a child of color is what um, ignites a fire for them to want to learn.
right. Right. And they need to start that earlier in their journey. Lydia, we're going to have to get you here at Sanctuary Columbus, okay?
Yes.
In person, I might get you to come here to Columbus just so you can meet Mandy, all right?
Yes, I'll drive down. It's not that far.
I got you. I got you. Yes. Were you going to say something before I said that?
I wasn't.
Oh, okay. All right. Just to make sure I didn't cut you off.
No.
Well, this has been a very rich conversation. It's not going to be the only one because I am determined to have you in some regards, Lydia, to Sanctuary. And Mandy, you've been a part of Sanctuary since before the beginning. Thank you very much. Um, and so we ain't letting you go. You ain't going
Mm.
nowhere. Uh,
Mm-mm.
but we also don't have very many adult adoptees at Sanctuary. You are one of two, and the second one I think just came within the last year and a half, at Sanctuary. But we've got, oh man, a dozen or more children who are going to grow up, in this regards. And I think about these children as well. What is something we're going to wrap up here a little bit at the end with some resources, but what's one thing or two things you would say to white families who are already in this transracial adoption journey? What's one thing you would say to them as they are raising children in their white families? And Mandy, we'll start with you.
Oh, Lydia, do you have something? I'm gonna think about this for a second.
All right. We'll
Yes.
start with Lydia.
So I kind of have a couple things. So
Okay.
sorry. Like I said, families a lot of times are working backwards. And it is important to have your child in spaces where they're seeing racial mirrors and but also having meaningful relationships with people of color.
Mm.
But you also need to be cognizant of the fact that you aren't just befriending people just because you have a Black child, right? Like if every white adopted parent starts texting and calling Mandy and is like, hey, this or that, that's a transactional relationship. That is not what Mandy is there for. Mandy did not choose to raise your child. You did. So right there, you have to be doing your own work. And so I just want families to be mindful of that. Don't just start bombarding my girl Mandy and start expecting her to teach you everything. There are tons of resources. There's lots of adoptees speaking out. You have to do your own work and not just expect us to spoon feed you.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else? You said you had a few things, so that was one.
Okay, that was one. My other one is just for any white space you're in, there's a Black space for you to be in. So like you're saying, there's families that are at your church, which is great. You should be taking your child to a Black hair salon, Black barber, finding extracurriculars where they can see children that look like them, right? It can't just be one space, and that's okay. Because in the same way, I always tell parents, you would do anything that would better your child, right? Like if your child had a medical condition, you would drive far to find the best doctor. Or if the town you live in doesn't have a good school, you'd probably send them to a different school. Parents be putting their kids on travel soccer teams and be going everywhere.
Hey.
In that same way, you can travel, even if it's not in your town, even if it's not the closest place. You need to be prioritizing your child's racial identity in the same way. And I'll stop there.
Hey, yes, to all that. Mandy?
Yeah, that was so good. I think I would challenge, if you as a dominant white culture parent don't ever feel uncomfortable, you're missing something. If when you're talking about adoption, you don't ever feel uncomfortable or I have a lot to learn, you're missing something. If you're always in spaces where you feel comfortable in your white skin, that means your Black child or your transracial child is not comfortable there. And so I love Lydia's point about it shouldn't just be one space, it should be all of their spaces. I think something I missed in my upbringing was seeing Black faith and Black people elevated in Christianity. And so it gave me a disconnect growing up. And so to have seen that in all of my spaces, I think would have done a lot for my racial identity, my racial reclamation process. So that's a really big one for me. How uncomfortable are you being parents? And when was the last time? It should be on a regular occasion. And then language is loaded. I think your children's stories, their process, all of that is so private and so powerful. That is for them and their story. And so I would really encourage anyone who's talking about adoption to really watch the language that they're using and the words that they're using. Even for me, when people say, given up for adoption, that's not a language I use or allow. Because I don't think that's honoring to my first mother or my first family. I think there's much more respectful terminology placed. She relinquished her rights, whatever that may be, that take a little bit longer to say or think through, but those words matter. Your adoptees internalizing that in their story and those words from their community. So those would be some things that really stick out to me.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's incredibly rich. Well, this is just the beginning of the conversation. We are going to wrap everything up in 50 minutes. And so there are more places where folks can continue their learning. First, Lydia, can you tell us about this group, this organization that you started, and how people can get connected to it, particularly adoptees who are African American? And I think you also said African Americans who are parents of adoptees. Is that right?
Yes. So
Okay.
Black Adoption Collective isn't super active right now. I would encourage you to just follow our Instagram page, which is Black Adoption Collective, um, to have that space. But there are ways just within that you can connect with other families and children. Um, I know there's also an Instagram page called Yes We Adopt, and it is run by a Black woman, stating that yes, even Black people adopt as well. There
Mm,
are lots of
yeah.
spaces for white adoptive parents, and there's not a lot for Black adoptive parents. So they also have great wisdom when it comes to the adoption experience. Um, and I would encourage adoptees either through Facebook or Instagram to start meeting other adoptees in the adoption community.
Yeah.
We love to talk. There's lots of events, especially this month. But throughout the year, I know there's a lot of Black adoptees and other adoptees of color that love to host different events.
Yeah. I mean, to that point, a lot of folks think that Black folks don't adopt. They just don't actually show up as much on the records. My father was adopted by his grandparents. So my
Yes.
grandma uh, relinquished her rights of parenting to her parents of her 1 year old son, who was my dad. And my great grandparents raised my father as he was their own
Mhm.
for 18 years of his life. But there's no formal record of that. Like his,
Right.
so, look, Black folks do adopt. Y'all think Black folks ain't adopting out there? We sure do. It may not
Mhm.
always show up on the record books, but we adopted. So thank you so much for telling us about the Black Adoption Collective and how folks can find that. Mandy, any other resources that you would recommend?
Two that I would recommend in addition to Lydia's own page, because like everything she posts, I've learned so much from it. I'm also like, I could have written that too, because that's a lot of
Mm,
my experience. We've already addressed, being Black isn't a monolith, being a TRA isn't a monolith, but it's a good place to start. I will say Angie Tucker. She is a adoptee educator and was my first introduction to the adoptee community and the adoption triad, which includes first family, adoptive parent, and then adoptee, has given me a lot of language. And then Hannah Jackson Matthews is also on Instagram and has some educational information that can be helpful too. But I think it's out there. You just have to look and you have to be willing to make yourself feel a little uncomfortable to put yourself out there. Pay people what they're asking to educate you because it's not free and emotional labor is important. And just kind of do the research to find those resources out there.
amen. Do y'all want to tell folks where your Cash App is? Where the Cash App? Huh?
Shout out to know my cash app, but you can find me on Instagram at adoptee number 2 adoption worker, and I'll send you my cash app.
All right. Mandy?
I actually don't know mine either, so y'all know where to find me. You can just slip a $5 in my pocket. I'll be at
Yes, yes, yes. Well, thank you all so much for this, for the resources, for sharing your life. This is rich, and I want you to know that sincerely. I am so grateful that you took the time to share in this table talk on the voice of the adoptee. Um, God bless you. God bless Sanctuary. Look, y'all, we are on a learning curve, and your pastor included. I got some repenting to do from some of the things that I've heard here, things that I've repeated in that narrative about adoption, which is why I was so focused on changing the conversation this year in 2021 on the voice of the adoptee. There's a long road and long journey we have here. We didn't talk about the transracial adoption of those from the Asian community. So that's a different conversation that we'll get to. We didn't talk about foster care. We didn't talk about open adoptions. There's so much more that we can learn here. Again, my hope is that this is the beginning for a lot of us and not the end, and we continue to learning. Lydia, we're going to see you soon,
Yes.
virtually or in Columbus, Ohio, by the grace of God. All right?
I love it. Thank you.
All right. Thank y'all so much.